We know that with the Windows operating system, when you first boot or launch the Windows, that you actually get to see the desktop. And the desktop can contain a variety of things, including folders, files, shortcuts, and even the taskbar and the start menu. What we want to start to work with, though, are the containers in which you will see different things once you launch Windows. These are those windows with the lowercase w. They all work the same way, whether you're working with a specific application and file, or whether you're working with the operating system and its folders and files, or even operating system tools. Something very simple. I'm going to move down to my Start button, and I'm going to give it a left click. And earlier, I pinned the calculator to the top of my Start menu. If you weren't following along in that particular lesson, you can type calculator in the search, or if you're on Windows XP, you need to go to your All Programs, open the Accessories folder, and you should find the calculator there. I'll go ahead and give the calculator entry a left click so that we can launch it. Now, in theory, the calculator is in a window, although this is a very simple, probably the most simple type of window you'll ever see. What I can see at the top is that there is an icon, which is usually going to be different for every type of application. In this case, it looks like a little calculator. I also see a band or a shaded bar at the top. This entire bar is called the title bar. And in the title bar, I not only get to see the little icon, I also get to see the name of the application, in this case, calculator. If I was working with something that had a specific file open, then I would see both the name of the application and the name of the specific file. On the right-hand side, we get to see 3 buttons that will be very important because we use them in every type of window that we work with. These windows are called Minimize, Maximize, and Close. The names are important because that's exactly what they do. Now currently, I have the calculator open, but let's say that I wanted to keep it open. I did not want to close it, but I just wanted to get it off of the desktop. That's what I can use the Minimize button for. When you click Minimize, which looks like a little underline, it actually kind of shrinks down the window and just places it down in the taskbar. Now I need to show you a couple of differences between Windows XP and Vista and Windows 7 that I'm using. In Windows XP and in Windows Vista, you will see the calculator show up as soon as you open it. Then when you minimize it, you'll see the button. The same is true here, except in Windows 7, I may actually see the button even before I launch the calculator, if it's been pinned to the task menu. Regardless of which version you're using, you can pause your mouse over the button, and you'll see a little tooltip or a little picture show up, and you can click on this in order to bring the window back up. I'll go ahead and give it a left click. So I minimized the calculator down to my taskbar, and then I restored it back to its original size. The middle button is actually called the Maximize button. It's interesting, but in the calculator, it actually doesn't do anything because the calculator is a fixed size. This particular window can't be resized. So when I pause my mouse over it, you'll see it doesn't change color. It doesn't get any shading, and it also doesn't give me a tooltip. If I click on it, it also doesn't do anything. The button that I can use, that I'm not going to use right away, is the Close button, which obviously closes the application down completely. So you'll always have a title bar in any window. You'll have what we call the application icon, the application name, possibly the name of the file, Minimize, Maximize, and Close buttons. And we'll talk a little bit more about Minimize, Maximize, Close in another application. The second thing that you'll find in common with almost every window that you open is there will be some type of menu system. For the calculator, there are just 3 menus, and we see those listed as text. They say View, Edit, and Help. All menus work basically the same way. When you click on them, they either fall down or up. These are called drop-down menus. And then you can move your mouse over a particular item and then do a single left click to make a choice. In this case, we can see that the calculator actually has several different options. I can use it as a standard calculator, a scientific calculator, a programming calculator, statistics, and so forth. On the right-hand side of a menu, you will often see the keyboard equivalents of choosing that option. Just a reminder, because I know it's easy to forget and then get confused when it's all so new, but I'm using Windows 7. If you're using another operating system, or even just because your computer is different than mine, like a Dell versus an HP or some other manufacturer, your exact options on menus and the buttons that you see may vary. So I can see that if I press Alt plus the number 2, I can change this to the scientific calculator. Now that may not be too big of a deal, but what it means is instead of clicking on View Scientific, I could simply press Alt 2 with the calculator open and get the same result. For many people, using the keyboard shortcut is preferable to having to go through multiple clicks to access a menu option. Here we'll go ahead and use the menu though. I'll go ahead and click Scientific. And you can see that the view of our calculator has changed and now includes all kinds of scientific functions. Likewise, any of our other menus will work the same way as well. For example, the Edit menu often contains the features to copy and paste information. In this case, the calculator also has History, and you can see that next to History it has a right-pointing arrow. This is called a flyout or an expanding menu, and it tells you that History is an item underneath the Edit menu, but then the History item itself has multiple options. Now we haven't done anything with the calculator, so all of these are grayed out. When a menu item is grayed out, it means it's not available. If a menu item is not available, it means that either it's not appropriate for whatever you're doing, or you haven't properly selected something that could use that. So in this case, all of these items are grayed out because we haven't done anything with the calculator yet. There is no history to copy, for example. The important point here, though, is that when you have a flyout menu, you don't actually have to click on it. All I have to do is move my mouse over it, pause for just a second, and then the menu will fly out. Sometimes you have multiple levels. In other words, you can go here, and then you'll fly out and fly out and fly out again. Just remember to pause and wait for the options. If you ever want to get out of a menu without making a choice and without deselecting something, remember that you can press your Escape key. So if I press my Escape key one time, that gets rid of the History flyout, and if I press my Escape key a second time, that collapses down the Edit menu. Notice that the Edit menu is still selected though, so to completely get out of the Edit menu itself, I'm going to press Escape a third time. Now you can see that it's no longer highlighted. The calculator is a very basic window. It has the title bar with Minimize, Maximize, and Close, even though Maximize isn't available, and it also has 3 very simple menus. But it gives you a good opportunity to see how this particular window works. What I want you to notice before we close this out is that if I move my mouse to an edge of this window and kind of move it back and forth across the edge, you will notice that the mouse cursor does not change. It stays at a white arrow. That's because the calculator window is not resizable. Many windows are, but some are not. And I just wanted to show you this because in just a few minutes we'll talk about resizing windows. What I can do with the calculator though is I can move it. If I don't like it over here on the left side of my screen, I can press and hold my left mouse button anywhere on the title bar, and I can drag it to a new location. Simply releasing the mouse when I get it to the position that I want. With that, let's go ahead and close the calculator and move on to a window that has a few more features for us to look at. Now I will click on the red X on the upper right corner of the window. This formally closes the calculator completely out. The next application I'd like to open is called Notepad. So once again, I'm going to come down to my Start button. In Windows Vista or Windows 7, I can simply type Notepad. And then press Enter. In Windows XP, you need to go to All Programs, Accessories, and select Notepad from there. Now, as you can see, this is very similar to the calculator. It has a title bar, it has a program icon, and currently it says Untitled/Notepad. This is important because this is showing us that while we are in this particular program called Notepad, currently we have not saved a file, so it's just called Untitled. But because you can save Notepad files, it has to put a file name here. Until it's formally saved, you'll often see things like Untitled or Document 1. If we move over to the right-hand side of our window, we again get to see the Minimize button, but this time our Maximize button is also active, and I can see that by moving my mouse over it and watching it change color or get shaded. When you maximize a window, you make it as big as the screen will allow. So I'm going to give a single left click on that. And you can see now that the desktop is hidden and Notepad is taking up as much room as it can. This is usually the way you want to work. What you also may notice is that my Maximize button has changed. Now it looks like two little overlapping squares. These buttons will toggle back and forth, if you will. When your window first opens in a moderate size, then this is the Maximize button that we just used. When it's maximized, it changes to something called the Restore. And if we click on the button at this point, it puts it back to its intermediate size. So the Minimize button will always be Minimize, the Close button will always be Close, but the button in the middle will toggle back and forth between Maximize and Restore, depending on what current state it's in. Earlier I told you that we could move the calculator by dragging the title bar, and that's still the same with the Notepad. But what you will notice that's different with Notepad is if we move to any edge, my mouse cursor changes from the white arrow to a double-headed arrow. With the double-headed arrow, you can manually resize a window. So if I move up and get that double-headed arrow, press and hold my left mouse button, and in this case drag up, I can make the window taller. If I move to the right edge and get the double-headed arrow, press and hold my left mouse button, and drag to the left, I can make it more narrow. This actually works on any edge of a resizable window. The calculator was not resizable, but Notepad is. Here's a little extra trick for you. If I move to a corner, I get a little diagonal arrow. And guess what? I can do a 2-for-1 using this one. If I have the diagonal arrow on a corner, I can press and hold, and I can both resize the width and the height at the same time. So this can just save me an extra step if I know exactly what size I want it to be. And again, once I get it to the size I want, I simply release my left mouse button, and that becomes the new Restore size. At this point, if I were to maximize or minimize, and I'll go ahead and minimize it, then I'll move down to my taskbar and click on the button to bring it back. You can see that Windows always remembers the last Restore size that you set. So you don't have to worry about having to resize it every time you use it if there's a particular size you like. Windows has a memory, and even though you don't formally save it, it actually will remember what the last restored size was. In the calculator, we also saw that we had some menus, and the same is true here. I can move up to the top of my screen, and I can see a few more. In this case, I have a File, Edit, Format, View, and Help menu. We looked at the Edit menu in our calculator, and I can look at the Edit menu here, and again you'll see that there are some similarities, like Cut, Copy, Paste. Most of the time, every application will have an Edit menu. Things like Undo, Cut, Copy, and Paste are universal things that are available in almost every application. Most often, they will be found in the Edit menu. So this is one of the commonalities you'll find. You will also notice that there are keyboard shortcuts listed on the right. So again, you can begin memorizing this if this is something that you want to use. One other item that I have in Notepad that I didn't have in the calculator can be found along the right edge and along the bottom edge. Some windows will have these two areas, and they're called scroll bars. Right now they're grayed out because I don't have anything in this document yet. Scroll bars only become applicable when the size of the file is either taller or wider than will currently fit into the window. Now, in order to show you how this works, I'm going to do something very quickly. It's not very elegant, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to type the letter A and then press Enter, and I'm going to do that over and over and over again until I get so many A's that I actually am starting to run off the bottom of the page. Now, just so you can see it a little bit better, I'm going to start typing some different letters. You can see that as I'm typing, the window is actually now scrolling, and I can't see all of the A's that were at the top of the page. What I can see, however, is that I now have an active vertical scroll bar. If I move my mouse over the scroll bar, I have a couple of options. At the very top, I can click the up arrow to scroll one line at a time up in the document, or I can click one time on the bottom arrow or the down arrow to scroll back down. The gray bar that you see here is called an elevator button, or sometimes called a scroll button, and the size of it actually depends on the size of the document. Since this is a very short document, the box itself is big, meaning that it's showing us a larger area of the document. If this was a 50-page document, the size of this bar would be much smaller, so it stays in proportion to the length of the document. What's important is that I can press and hold my left mouse button, and while holding the left mouse button, I can drag up and down to scroll the window. So I can drag it all the way to the bottom, or I can drag it all the way to the top. Now in this short document, that may not be a big deal, but imagine that you do have a 50-page document. There, moving 10 or 20 pages at a time is going to be a lot better than using maybe your keyboard shortcuts of page down, page down, page down, time and time again. So here you can see that even though this is very similar to the calculator, we have a little bit more functionality. In addition to the features we had in the calculator, we also can use the restore button and the maximize button. We can resize the window. We have some additional menus, and we also have scroll bars. With that, let's go ahead and close Notepad. And because we typed some things in here, it wants to know if we want to save them. I'm going to say no, don't save. And now I want to open up WordPad. So again, we'll move down to the Start button, type WordPad. If you're using Windows XP, remember again that this will be under your Accessories folder. And now we get to see that this looks very different in some ways than the other two windows we've looked at. Let's take a look actually at what we have here. We still have a title bar with a system icon. It tells us that this is a plain document because it hasn't been saved yet, and that we're in WordPad. And on the right side of it also has a minimize, maximize, and close button. Then we have something here that's known as a toolbar. It's a toolbar because it has little buttons on it instead of just being menus, which are text-based. This is part of the new version that comes with either Office 2007 or Windows 7. This happens to be called the Quick Launch bar, and there's a button here, for example, to quickly save, as well as to undo and redo. What is perhaps most important, though, is you don't see the typical or the standard menus. In Office 2000 and Windows 7, they have gone to something called a tabbed interface. Now, there's actually several words you'll hear. One of them is the arrow interface, one of them is the fluent interface, and specifically for Microsoft Office, they call it the ribbon. The concept here is, except instead of clicking on a text name, having it drop down, and then having a bunch of flyout menus, in this particular scenario, you use tabs. So I have a Home tab and a View tab, and I can left click on either one of those to toggle back and forth. From the Home tab, I have several different things. I'm just going to give you some terminology here. A tab then has groups. So this particular Home tab has a clipboard group, a font group, a paragraph group, an insert group, and an editing group. Within a group, you have options. So if I go back to the left, the clipboard group has the paste option, as well as a cut and copy option, which currently are grayed out. In the ribbon, some of the options also have drop downs. You'll notice at the bottom of the paste button, there's a down arrow, meaning I can click on this, and I'm going to see different options. In this case, I can see paste and paste special. This option will be grayed out until you have something copied or cut, though, because you can't paste until you've cut or copied something. Even though this looks a little bit different, the concept is the same as a flyout menu. If I was doing the same thing in a traditional menu, it would be going to the Edit menu, going to the Paste option, and then choosing Paste or Paste Special from the Paste flyout. The terminology here, though, is going to the Home tab, in the clipboard group, using the Paste option, and then selecting the Paste or Paste Special. Just like in a regular menu, though, I can press Escape once to get out. Many of these features are covered more specifically in the Applications classes, for example, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint 2007 or 2010. But I did want to show you some things that look a little bit different, as Microsoft transitions from the older menu features that have been around really for about 15 years and coming into a newer age with an improved interface known often as the ribbon or the fluent interface. One more thing I wanted to show you about menus though, in addition to flyout menus, is that sometimes we get a dialog box. In WordPad, there's a small button just to the left of the Home tab. If I click on this, this is the equivalent of the old File menu. I can see that I can create new things, I can open, I can save as, and I can also see things like Print. Now Print in a normal menu would have been followed by an ellipses, a series of 3 dots. And when you click on something in a regular menu that has 3 dots, it brings up a dialog box. In this new interface, I can go to Print, and then actually choose the Print option in the flyout, and I basically get to the same place. This is also a print dialog. Now we're going to talk more about printing and printers and the print dialog box in a later chapter, but I just wanted to show you that a dialog box is a special kind of window. It still has a title bar, it still has an icon and a title, and I can still move it around by dragging it. Usually you cannot resize dialog boxes. One of their properties is that they are not resizable. Also, they have a property called modal, meaning it simply pops open on top of anything else that you have open on your screen. And that's good, because a dialog box is waiting for you to give the computer some type of input it needs. In other words, if you're going to print a document, it needs to know what printer you want to use, how many copies you want to make, and all kinds of other settings. So dialog boxes are movable, but they are generally not resizable, and they are modal, meaning they come up on top, and you have to either cancel out or make some choices and say OK before you can get back to your application. You will notice that there are no minimize and maximize buttons. You either need to make a choice and say OK, or you need to close it out. And in a dialog box, you can close it out without making choices by using the close button, or somewhere near the bottom, you will see an option to either make a choice, in this case to print, or to cancel. Sometimes if you're setting features, like we were with screensavers and desktops, you may also see an apply option, which allows you to apply the choices you've made without closing the box. While I certainly can click on these buttons, I just want to remind you that everything you can do with your mouse, you can also do with your keyboard. So if I press my buttons, in this case I'm just pressing the Tab key, I will move through all of the options in this dialog box, and you can see that the print button gets highlighted and then it turns off being highlighted, and eventually cancel is highlighted. If I ever got in a position where my mouse didn't work for some reason, don't think you're stuck. Remembering that you can always use your Tab key to move through options in a window, including getting up to the File menu where you can choose to exit or close. You can then highlight a selection and then press Enter to choose it. So now that I've pressed my Tab key several times and I have the Cancel button highlighted, I'm going to press Enter on my keyboard, and that cancels me out of the print dialog box without having to use my mouse or without having to make a choice. The basics of Windows with the lower W are always the same. A title bar with the system icon as well as the name of the application, possibly the name of a file if it's appropriate, a close button, and also if it's appropriate, a minimize and maximize button. We also can move the window by simply dragging it by its title bar. In some types of applications, you may see vertical and horizontal scroll bars that allow you to scroll up and down and left to right if the particular document is larger than the window size itself. Most windows are also sizable, and by moving to any edge, you can get the double-headed arrow and drag them to be the size you want. Often, we maximize windows when we're working with them, and that's just as easy by clicking on the button itself instead of fully dragging it out. Most of our applications in Windows will also have some type of a menu bar. If you're using newer applications or newer operating systems, you may see the ribbon instead of the traditional menu bar, but the concepts are the same. You're going to make kind of hierarchical choices by first selecting a menu or a tab and then making appropriate choices from there, sometimes from flyout menus and sometimes from dialog boxes. Remember that dialog boxes have their own special little features, primarily that you have to deal with them by either making a choice and saying OK or canceling without making choices before you can continue working in the application. There are a variety of other things that you'll find in specific application windows, but that really is what we need to learn for this particular part of our course. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and simply close my window, but I want to do it in a little bit of a special way. I have just pressed Alt-F on my keyboard. Now, Alt-F is kind of a universal shortcut for displaying the File menu. Even though I'm in a newer version of WordPad that technically doesn't have the File menu, Alt-F still displays the button in this case instead of the File menu. If you're ever working in a menu and you see that one of the letters of the menu name is underlined, that means you can press the Alt key and that letter to access it. Alt-F, as I said, is one of those universal ones that almost always works. So again, I'm just going back to some keyboard shortcuts here to show you that you can use the keyboard just like you would normally use the mouse. In this case, Alt-F displays the options that I want to see. Then I can press my down arrow all the way to the bottom until I see Exit. Then I can press Enter to make that choice. And that closes WordPad. And that kind of concludes our tour of the little w windows used within the big W windows. Now you're familiar with both the operating system and how to work with the containers that hold information, files, folders, and other stuff within the Windows operating system itself. We've been having some fun working with Windows with both a capital W and a lowercase w. But now I want to give you kind of a scenario or a story problem. Now don't panic, it doesn't involve any math. I just want to know what you would do. Let's say that you come home, tired after a long day, and find your kids at home. Now please, you got to work with me on this. Maybe you work from home so you don't come home after a long day, and maybe you don't have kids. But for me, just pretend for a minute that you do. You basically have 3 kids. Child number 1 is being good, quote unquote, and studying at the kitchen table for a math test that they have tomorrow. Child number 2 is trying to be helpful, emphasis on the word trying, by preparing dinner, since he knows you're tired, and in his quest to make peanut butter and jelly for everyone, he has landed 3 pieces of bread jelly side down on the kitchen floor. Child number 3, being completely oblivious to helping out around the house or to schoolwork, is in the backyard playing with the dogs. The dogs have effectively tackled him on the concrete, thus resulting in a fair amount of blood coming from each of his knees, as well as tears from his eyes. Now, my question for you is, what do you do? Now, first let me tell you there's a limitation. You can't say scream and run out of the house. That is not one of your options. But in reality, what would you do in this particular situation? Well, my guess is that you would probably kind of do some prioritization. Bloody knees is probably going to take priority over math problems and peanut butter and jelly on the floor. But it would be a process, right? You'd probably get the kid with the bloody knees, bring him inside, dry off the tears, give him a hug, make sure the dogs are outside so they're not continuing to cause problems. Get some cleaner, maybe sit him on the kitchen counter and let him start rinsing off his knees in the sink. Meanwhile, while he's doing that, you can be grabbing some paper towels and thrusting them at the child who's doing peanut butter jelly and saying, "Thank you for trying, but can you please get the jelly off the floor?" While those 2 things are going on, you might be also addressing child number 1. Okay, we got washing going on in the sink, we got wiping up going on over on the floor, and by the way, what is your math test about tomorrow? This is what parents do, and they do it on almost a continuous basis. You probably just never thought about it before. If we take a look at this very carefully, though, you really aren't doing 3 things at once. And you've probably told people before in your life, I can't do more than 1 thing at a time. It appears like you're handling all 3 problems. But really what you're doing is handling little bits and pieces of each of the 3 problems and then switching off between them. So we get the kid with the bloody knees started, and while he's getting started, you're handing paper towels to the other kid, and after you hand the paper towels off, then you're asking about the math problem. Then you're probably going to go back to the sink and see what you need to do with Band-Aids. Get the idea? Good, because I want you to keep that exact idea when we talk about our next topic. The topic is known as multitasking. Multitasking in a computer is the process of having more than one operation running on a computer at the same time. In older computer systems, a single application would hold up the other applications while it completed its tasks. So let's say you were trying to print a large document. The word processor would hold control over the processor and say, none of you get to do any of the things you want until I'm done printing out every one of these pages. And that really slowed things down. That would be the same as you saying, I can't deal with any of the other two kids until I completely have all of the knees cleaned up, bandaged up, hugs and kisses taken care of. Now, while it may seem that that is an easy way to do it, so you can focus on one thing at a time, it really isn't the reality of the way things work, and it really isn't the most efficient, because in doing so, we isolate one thing and can only take care of one thing at a time. That one thing likes that particular attention, but unfortunately, all the others have to wait. And when's the last time in your workday that you can remember being able to focus on only one project until that project was completely finished and buttoned up before you even had to think one time about another one? It just isn't reality. Since Windows 2000 in the computer world, we've had something called preemptive multitasking, and I love that. That means to prioritize multiple activities going on at the same time. The way that this happened is with Windows 2000 and everything after, we let the operating system take control from the applications and decide who gets priority and in what order. This is basically what you do at home. If you've ever had kids that are fighting, you probably don't address all of them at once. You take control. You don't just let them run wild and handle it on their own. Otherwise, bad things could happen. And then you prioritize things, like you did in this particular scenario. Between studying for a math test and needing help, cleaning up peanut butter and jelly, and having bloody knees and tears, you probably realized doing some triage that the bloody knees needed to have priority. And that's exactly what you did. The computer now does exactly the same by taking the control away from each individual application and saying, okay, let me take a look at what's trying to go on. Maybe one application wants to print, while another application is trying to do a calculation, and a third one is trying to receive some email. Which one of these has priority? And I'm going to let that one go first. But I'm not going to let it completely finish all of its tasks. I'm going to let it do maybe part of the task, then I'll give some control of the processor over to another one. That's what preemptive multitasking is all about. If we have only a single processor, remember that the processor can only do one at a time. But what makes it appear like the computer is doing more than one thing is just like you did with your kids. It looks like you're handling all three because you were switching back and forth between the three very quickly. That's what the processor does as well. Now remember, we did introduce something a little while ago called multi-core processors. Remember dual-core and quad-core processors? So that has changed things a little bit. Remember that that means you actually have 4 processors. And if you have 4 processors, it can do 4 things at once. At least for our scenario, that's what we'll say it does. So, in the older versions and with single-core processors, they're only doing one thing at a time. But it is keeping control and switching back and forth between multiple tasks, so it may appear that your computer is receiving an email, printing a document, and performing calculations all at once. That multi-core processor thing is really beyond what we want to talk about, but I just want you to be aware of that. Multi-core processors handle threads, which very simply are just portions of a task, just like you did. You didn't handle all of cleaning up and bandaging the knees. You started off by getting them clean, and then you did something else. Multi-core processors do this as well by simply splitting larger tasks into smaller ones and allowing the equivalent of multiple tasks to occur at once. The entire concept of multitasking isn't really something you need to be aware of because most of it's happening behind the scenes. But if you used computers or you're aware of computers that are maybe 15 to 20 years or more older, then you might remember that you could only work in one application at a time. And people also spent a lot of time watching a busy cursor. As I said, if it was printing a document, nothing else was going to happen on that particular file or computer until the printing was done. So multitasking, while it seems almost transparent to us, is really a critical part. And what we want to do next is kind of show you how you can work with multiple windows at the same time through multitasking. Well, it's very difficult to demonstrate in this type of an environment what the processor is actually doing. We can work with multiple windows. Now, if you're currently on Windows XP or Windows Vista, your taskbar should be completely empty. Everything should be closed. Because I'm on Windows 7, I do have some icons that are down here because they are pinned to the taskbar. But notice that none of them are shaded, so none of them actually have anything open and they're not running themselves. What we're going to do though is we're going to launch or open 3 different programs. So from the Start button, let's go ahead and open up the calculator, and I'm going to do this by typing and then pressing enter when it's highlighted. And then I'll click the Start button again, and this time I'm going to choose WordPad. And lastly, a new program, also from the Start button. This one is called Paint. Remember that if you're using Windows XP, all of these can be found under All Programs in your Accessories folder. Alright, so now I currently have 3 programs running at the same time. And there's a couple of things we need to take a look at here. First of all, in your taskbar, you should now have 3 buttons. In XP and Vista, you should see buttons for all 3 applications. And in Windows 7, like I have, we can see that I have 3 buttons that have shown up. If I pause over them, I can see that they are WordPad, Paint, and Calculator. Regardless of which operating system you're running, you should also be able to see that one of the buttons is lit up. It looks like it's lit up and maybe even pushed in. This is designating something called the active window. Even though the Windows operating system can have multiple windows open at any given time, whether it's multiple applications or just multiple documents, for example, you can only have one active window at a time. The active window is the one that will be getting attention. So going back to our analogy, you have 3 kids, and all 3 kids are actually in the process of doing something, but only one of them can actually have your full attention at any given time. As a matter of fact, we could get into the psychology of it all. Only one could have any of your attention at one time. You really can't process 2 things at once. In our case, we have one active window, and the active window is the one where everything will happen. If you are typing, if you are clicking on buttons, if you're copying and pasting, those things only happen in the active window, and the active window is designated in a couple of ways. The first way we've already seen. The active window will be highlighted on the taskbar. Now if I move my Paint window, it's a little subtle, maybe a little bit difficult to see, but if you look at the title bar, you can see that the title bar of my active window is also darker and the others are grayed out. So WordPad and Calculator, which I can see in the background, also have title bars, but hopefully you can see that the title bar of Paint is a little bit different. Then again, showing me my active window. Well, everything that we've already learned about Windows is the same. If I have the active window and it's on top, I can do things in this particular window. I can type, and in this case, because it's Paint, I could use paint brushes and things like that. So why am I bringing you back into Windows if everything is the same? Well, the first is because I wanted to show you what an active window was. Active windows don't make any difference if you only have one window open, as we have in the past. The other thing I wanted to show you, though, are some different ways of arranging windows when you have multiple windows open. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the right side of my Paint window, and I'm going to maximize it. This, of course, makes it virtually impossible for me to get to my Calculator window. I can use it, though, from the taskbar. When you maximize a window, you normally will be able to still see the taskbar. The maximized window will cover everything else on the screen except the taskbar. However, if you've changed the properties of the taskbar and turned off the Always Keep the Taskbar on Top of Other Windows option, which is available in Windows XP and Vista, then a maximized window will cover everything, including the taskbar, because the maximized window actually will be sitting on top of it. I don't ever like covering the taskbar. It's too important and I use it too much. So I would not recommend deselecting this option in the taskbar properties. But if you do, then you will need to restore the window to its medium size or minimize it in order to access the taskbar itself. Now, back to Paint. In this case, when I maximized Paint, it made it impossible for me to access my Calculator window, which is underneath it on the desktop. So one option of switching between windows when you have multiple windows open is to move down to the taskbar, Move over the button for the item that you want. In this case, I want my calculator, and simply click on the button. That brings that window to the front and also makes it the active window. You can see that the title bar of the calculator is now colored and the title bar of the paint window has been grayed out. If I wanted to switch to WordPad, I could simply click on its button. And of course, to get back to paint, I can click on the button over there as well. If you have multiple files open in any single application, when you move over the button, you may see that you have multiple items listed above the button. To make one particular one active, you would simply click on it. But to do all of this, I actually have to move down to the taskbar, maybe take my hands off the keyboard, move them to the mouse, and that can be a little time consuming. So let me show you a couple of my favorite tricks when it comes to working with multiple windows. The first is called Alt-Tab switching, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You're going to use your Alt key and your Tab key. Now you have to kind of listen carefully as I'm doing this on my computer. I do it kind of using an L with my left hand. I press and hold the Alt button with my left thumb. While I'm still holding the Alt key, I'm going to begin pressing and releasing the Tab key. So hold Alt. While you're holding Alt, press and release Tab. What you will see is that a window comes up in the middle of your screen. As you continue to hold Alt, but while you're holding the Alt key, as you press and release the Tab key, you will see that each open window in turn gets highlighted and a box put around it. So there's my desktop, my paint, there's WordPad, and there's the calculator. And by continuing to press and release Tab while I'm holding Alt, I can scroll through each of these. Now I'm doing this very slowly, but here's what I want you to notice. If I was in my heyday and working as fast as I could, I can switch very quickly between windows. Hold Alt, press Tab until I get it around Paint. Once I get the one highlighted I want, I release the Alt key. So now I can move back and forth between my calculator and my Paint window this quickly. And if I wanted to bring in some other things, I can just continue to go as fast as possible. Now that's not to show off how fast I can actually do Alt-Tab switching. It's just to show you that once you get good at this, you have to trust me that it's much faster to use this keyboard shortcut than it is to move your hand to the mouse. Imagine that I was typing in WordPad and I wanted to use the calculator. Instead of typing, moving to the mouse, minimizing WordPad, maximizing the calculator, typing in my entry, minimizing the calculator, maximizing WordPad, all I have to do is type. With my hands on the keyboard, I can Alt-Tab to get back to my other programs, and you can see that that's going to be a much faster alternative. I really do like Alt-Tab switching. And remember that if you happen to be running Windows 7, and if your keyboard has a Windows key, you can substitute the Windows key for the Alt key and get a really cool three-dimensional effect. What I want to do now, though, is I want to go ahead and work with multiple windows just a little bit more. So I'm going to start by closing the calculator. Now the calculator is kind of in the middle of my stack here, and I could go up, make it active, and click on its close button, but I also can close things right from the taskbar. So if I can't see them, if they're buried under other windows, it's no big deal. To do so, you simply move over the taskbar button and right-click. And right-clicking will give you the option, regardless of which operating system version you have, to close the window. I'm going to go ahead and choose Close the Window. And you can see that the calculator goes away, as does the button from the taskbar, and everything's good. Now we know how to move and size windows by dragging their title bar, by getting the double-headed arrows and resizing them. So if I wanted to arrange WordPad and my Paint window side by side, or one on top of the other, I certainly could. But I think you can also see how that would take a little bit of effort and probably time to get them exactly right. And then they probably wouldn't be sized exactly even as well. Another feature that you have is available from the taskbar. When you have multiple windows open, you can right-click the taskbar. And these options are going to be slightly different depending on which version of Windows you have. But most of them will have an option to cascade the windows, to show the windows side by side. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Cascade so you can see that option. You can see that it kind of fans them so you can see the title bar. And if I had 5 or 6 open windows, I still could see at least the titles and the file names for each one that I had. If I move back down to the taskbar and right-click, and this time choose Show Windows Stacked, that puts them one on top of the other. In Windows XP, the term's going to be show them vertically or horizontally. Here they've changed the name just a little bit. And then, of course, you can probably guess what my next option is going to be. Again, if I right-click, the next option is to show windows side by side, which instead of stacking them one on top of each other, is going to show them side by side. Hopefully you can see, though, how quickly that allows you to work with multiple windows without having to manually move and resize them yourself. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, one reason might be because I have an email that I need to work with and maybe a letter or some type of file that I need to respond. Instead of bouncing back and forth by using Alt-Tab switching, I could simply place them side by side. That way I could continue to look at my email and then write my response on the right-hand side. I think you get the idea. There are many times when you actually want to see windows arranged in this manner. And the easiest way is to simply right-click the taskbar. Another option that we had from the taskbar with a right-click was showing the desktop. That's going to simply minimize all windows that you have open very quickly. And that actually is a good thing. Let's say that you work in human resources and you happen to be reading or writing a private issue dealing with one of your employees. Somebody walks into your office. Instead of kind of fumbling around and, oh, wait, let me minimize all of these windows, it would be much faster just to right-click and say, show the desktop. Another option I want to show you, though, is new to Windows 7. So I'm going to press Escape to get out of the shortcut menu, and I'm going to move over to the far right side of my taskbar. Now remember, this is only available in Windows 7, but you can see a little tab. If I put my mouse over that tab, I can click and it shows me the desktop. This is the same feature, but it just saves you a click. Instead of right-clicking and having to find Show the Desktop, it's a little bit faster to come over here instead. With most of your applications as well, if you simply pause over that option without actually clicking, it will temporarily hide the window, and as soon as you move your mouse off of it, you get to see it again. That's nice if there's something on the desktop that you just want to take a quick look at, and then get right back to work. One last thing that I want to show you, though, because I still have my Paint and my WordPad open, is what to do if an application starts to behave badly. Now, in our analogy, we had the kids, and some were trying to be helpful and studious, and others were just playing, but sometimes they just behave so badly that you kind of need to not deal with them right now. Often, for parents, that's called a timeout. Well, we can kind of send our applications to a timeout as well. If your computer ever freezes or locks, and you've waited a little bit of time, you've tried clicking, you've tried pressing escape, all of the different things that you know to try, and you just can't do anything with it, this is going to be your last option. If you press Control-Alt-Delete at the same time, and actually my recommendation is to press Control and Alt first, and then Delete, just because that tends to work a little bit better, you will see a variety of options come up on your screen. The one I want to talk about right now usually is at the bottom of the list, and it's called the Task Manager. If you click this option, it will bring up a window showing all of your currently running applications. Now, there are a lot more things to see here. You can go into processes, services, performance, networking. All of these, though, are very high-end kind of IT activities. We simply want to be on the Applications tab. And if it was Paint that was giving me a problem, I couldn't get it unstuck for whatever reason, I can simply select it, and I can move to the bottom of this dialog box, and I can click End Task. It says the system cannot end the program because it's waiting for a response from you. Now, you can go ahead and choose to wait, or if the program is really stuck, what you need to do is say, yes, I understand that, but go ahead and end now. Because we've already waited for the program, we've already tried to do different things, we know that we don't have an option. So we will click End Now. And after just a few seconds, that will effectively close the program. You can see that it's no longer on my taskbar, and it also is no longer showing in the Windows Task Manager. The Task Manager should not be used normally to close down windows. When you're working in an application, you typically want to save a file and then close it using either File Close or your Close button, or by right-clicking it on the taskbar. This is kind of your last-ditch effort if you've tried to do things and it just seems to be stuck for some reason. But this allows you to close down a single application, In other words, take care of the one unruly child without having to take it out on all of the children, in this case all of your applications. So if I was working on 2 or 3 different things, I now could close this window and I could continue working with those applications, having handled the one that was being difficult. Just to get us finished up here, I still have WordPad open. I'm going to go ahead and right-click, choose Close the Window. I don't want to save any changes that I've made. And with that, you have now been introduced to multitasking and the use of multiple windows at the same time using the Windows operating system.